This video is brought to you by Brilliant. The last few weeks have been pretty great for the Democrats. Since switching Biden out for Kamala Harris, Democrats have dominated the airwaves and enjoyed a remarkable poll surge, with Harris now leading Trump in the popular vote by something like 4 points. Nonetheless, despite this surge in enthusiasm, the race for the presidency is still basically a toss-up, and this speaks to an uncomfortable truth for Democrats. As much as they might try to convince wider America that he's a threat to democracy, Trump is still a relatively strong candidate, with some structural advantages, as well as a number of well-rehearsed attack lines against Democrats that he's prosecuted effectively over the past year or so. So in this video, we're going to have a look at 3 reasons that Trump might well win in November: the economy, the border, and Trump's tendency to overperform the polls in presidential elections. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, before we get into it, 2 quick caveats. First, obviously this video isn't intended as an exhaustive list of reasons that Trump could win. We're just picking the 3 we think are most relevant, but let us know in the comments if there's anything we missed that should have been included. Second, before we get a whole load of comments telling us this video portrays our pro-Trump bias, we should say that we'll be doing another video on 3 reasons that Kamala will win sometime in the near future. So subscribe to be notified when that video comes out. Anyway, caveats aside, let's get into it, starting with the economy. In short, voters have always trusted Trump more on the economy, despite the fact that, at least at first glance, Biden's economic record looks really rather good. The American economy suffered lower inflation than its European peers, recovered faster post-pandemic, and has since enjoyed some of the strongest GDP growth amongst not just developed economies, but the world more generally. According to research by the House of Commons Library, America's real GDP has grown by nearly 10% relative to pre-pandemic, far more than basically any other G7 country. The US has also grown faster than basically every other developing economy in this time, many of which have struggled with high interest rates, and has even outperformed China at points. In the third quarter of 2023, for instance, the US grew at an annualized rate of nearly 6%, above China's stated annual rate of about 5%. This strong GDP growth has helped push the unemployment rate down to below 4%, its lowest in decades and one of the lowest in the G7. A tight labour market has also meant strong real wage growth, especially for lower earners, which has actually reversed more than a third of the increase in wage inequality over the past 4 decades. Nonetheless, despite this strong showing, and the fact that, as the American economy has grown, voters have become more likely to express positivity about their personal finances or the economy in their state, voters are still overwhelmingly negative about the national economy. Most Americans think that the economy is doing worse than it was under Trump, and barely 35% approve of Biden's handling. Biden's approval rating has duly collapsed and decoupled from the Consumer Sentiment Index, which has historically tracked presidents' approval ratings remarkably well. The disconnect between voters' perception of the national economy and the reality, which doesn't seem to be happening in other countries, has been termed the vibe session by commentators, and we're still not really sure why it's happened. It seems to be, in part, because Americans are just misinformed about the state of the economy, and there's definitely a partisan element, evidenced by the widening perception gap between Democrats and Republicans. But the overwhelming reason seems to be that, well, American voters just hate inflation. Anyway, whatever the cause, it's been great for Trump. Trump enjoyed roughly a 10-point lead over Biden on questions of the economy. And while there's some polling suggesting that voters trust Harris more than Biden on the economy, other polling suggests that they still overwhelmingly prefer Republicans. On top of that, swing state voters still prefer Trump, who has a roughly 5-point lead over Harris in basically every swing state. Things could get worse for Harris as well if the American economy continues showing signs of weakness. The most worrying sign here for Harris is the steep collapse in new jobs, which has historically been a pretty good indicator of an incoming recession. For context, some 114,000 jobs were created in July, significantly lower than both the 175,000 forecast by Wall Street and the 215,000 average gain over the past 12 months. This triggered the so-called SARM rule, which states that when the 3-month moving average of the unemployment rate is at least 0.5 percentage points above its low over the prior 12 months, then the US economy will enter a recession, and has predicted basically every recession since the 1970s. Anyway, let's move on to the second reason that Trump might well win: the border. In short, the past year or so has seen a steep uptick in the number of migrants being apprehended at the southern border, which is treated as a good proxy for the total number of people coming into the US illegally. As you'd expect, this has translated to a surge of asylum applications, and although the rejection rate has also increased, this has nonetheless created an enormous case backlog, which has risen from about 1 million under Trump to over 3 million today. Polling suggests that immigration is one of voters' top priorities, behind only the economy, and that they trust Trump on the issue, with the latest Fox News poll giving Trump a massive 19-point lead over Harris on the issue of border security. The third and final reason is that Trump has reliably outperformed the polls at presidential elections. While it's true that Democrats have outperformed the polls at recent special elections, including the 2022 midterms and a handful of elections last year, Trump outperformed the polls in both 2016, when most pollsters were giving him a less than 10% chance of beating Hillary Clinton, and in 2020. It's often forgotten today, but even though Biden won in 2020, in the end it was a lot closer than the polls suggested. In the weeks before the election, the polls were giving Biden more than an 8-point lead over Trump, when in the end he ended up winning the popular vote by 4.4 points, which means that the polls were the most inaccurate since 1980. Pollsters have tried to recalibrate to take this into account, but they tried and failed to account for the quiet Trump vote in 2020 after 2016. Given the polls currently have the race as a toss-up, if nothing changes and Trump again outperforms, he should win in November. Understanding these kinds of issues is really important, but also difficult. That's why TLDR is here to help you. Unfortunately though, the world's only getting more complex, especially when it comes to tech and AI. Now, I'm not qualified to teach you about that, but luckily Brilliant are. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Brilliant is a learning platform designed to be uniquely effective. Their first principles approach helps you build understanding from the ground up. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. For instance, if you did want to learn more about the increasingly important world of tech, you might want to check out the How Technology Works courses. That runs you through everything from how computer memory works to how exactly GPS can pinpoint your location, or why some online videos buffer, and how compression enables modern streaming. And although I did throw myself under the bus earlier, now I'm not qualified to teach you about that. Jack does have a degree in computer science, and he can tell you that
These courses aren't just high quality, they're also far more interesting than the lectures I sat through. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, or click the link in the description. That way you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know you came from us.